Philippians chapter 2, and I'm going to read verse 19, and I'm going to read down to verse 30, so the rest of the chapter. If the Lord Jesus is willing, I hope to send Timothy to you soon for a visit. Then he can cheer me up by telling me how you're getting along. I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. All the others care only for themselves and not for what matters to Jesus Christ. But you know how Timothy has proved himself. Like a son with his father, he has served with me in preaching the good news. I hope to send him to you just as soon as I find out what is going to happen to me here. And I have confidence from the Lord that I myself will come to see you soon. Timothy is a very, very close friend of Paul that actually a lot of you guys might know about. He comes up in so many of the stories we read about Paul in Acts, but even more so, he comes up in so many of the letters Paul has written. And we even have in our Bibles today 2 of the letters that Paul sent to Timothy to encourage him in his works. And Timothy was a sort of apprentice to Paul. Paul was his mentor that he discipled. Timothy was a very close relationship, and it seems like Paul had so much love and respect for Timothy. Everything Paul did, every place he ministered to, Timothy was a part of that ministry, those travels. He was so interlinked. They seemed to do everything together, and Timothy was there to be able to learn from Paul and continue in what Paul was doing. And then we hear a beautiful line like this: I have no one else like Timothy who genuinely cares about your welfare. There was an incredible amount of respect between Paul and Timothy. It's stunning. Paul goes on to write, this is from verse 25. Meanwhile, I thought I should send Epaphroditus back to you. He is a true brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, and he was your messenger to help me in my need. I am sending him because he has been longing to see you, and he was very distressed that you heard he was ill. And he certainly was ill. In fact, he almost died. But God had mercy on him, and also on me, so that I would not have one sorrow after another. So I'm all the more anxious to send him back to you, for I know you will be glad to see him, and then I'll be not so worried about you. Welcome him in the Lord's love and with great joy, and give him the honor that people like him deserve. For he risked his life for the work of Christ, and he was at the point of death while doing for me what you couldn't do from afar. When we look into it, I was reading some guides, and people have found out that Epaphroditus wasn't a friend of Paul's. He was actually a part of the church of Philippi. He was one of the Philippians. But the Philippians actually knew that Paul was in prison and sent a gift of money and food to Paul as a sign of thanksgiving and care to send their prayers. And it seems like Epaphroditus was the guy who actually took this gift and this offering and actually brought it to Paul in person. You couldn't just post things and deliver them over. This had to be done in person. So Epaphroditus was the brave man who apparently almost died on his travels and during this trip just to send this gift to Paul. But once again, it seems like Epaphroditus is an incredible man. We hear that he almost died. I've completely lost where it says it. We read that he almost dies on his mission for the ministry. God has clearly called the church of Philippi to send this gift offering, and Epaphroditus put his life on the line for it, which is exactly what Jesus did. He put his life on the line for the mission that Jesus was on, and for this, Paul is commending Epaphroditus and saying, this is a man imitating Jesus. This is a man living for his ministry. I think what we can learn from these two parts is, so far in the letter, Paul has been talking about this idea of imitate Christ, live a life that God would be proud of, live a life full of ministry and love and serving, and says just copy Jesus, live as Jesus did, learn from Jesus. But what I think is so great about this is he points out, while you're trying to live a life that imitates Jesus, you can also be inspired, encouraged, and try to imitate other Christians around you. Even in other letters he says a line, Paul says a line, imitate me as I imitate Christ. As Christians, it can be really tough to try keep having the motivation to live like Jesus. He lived a very different life to us. He lived in a very different time to us, a different culture, a different world. So though it's so important and he will always be our perfect representation of heaven on earth, he will always and should always be our original source for learning how to live a life that God would be pleased with. He is always the first resource that we should go to. It can be really difficult to keep striving after that. So we can take inspiration and we can take motivation for other people around us who are doing an amazing job at imitating Christ too. While Paul is pointing to Jesus and saying, look at this life, live like him, he then points out these two fellow brothers in the church and says, hey, but look what we can learn from them too. Look how Timothy loves and cares for the people around him. Look how Epaphroditus put his life on the line. And in that same way, we can do that too. While we look to Jesus and say, wow, how can we learn from him? We can take inspiration, we can learn and be loved by the people around us who are doing that too. In the last video I said, I pointed out that Paul says that we're not in this alone, that we get to do this as a family, we get to do this as the church. So let's look to our brothers and sisters and see how they're doing it too. Let's learn from them, maybe learn from their mistakes or their successes. There's nothing more inspiring than hearing the testimonies and stories of the people who have gone before us and seeing how they did it, seeing how they experienced Christ, how they brought heaven to earth. Even maybe you need a more long-term relationship. Maybe there's someone, an elder above you who actually you're really close with and you could learn so much from. Maybe you need them to mentor you for a while. Maybe you need to actually go to a Christian who you have so much admiration for and you think maybe I can learn from them as well. They can help me imitate Jesus. And maybe you just need to go for a coffee for a while. You just need to sit down and learn from them and get close to them, kind of like Timothy and Paul's relationship. But going forward, let us remember we're not in this alone. And on those days where it feels so difficult to get up and love like Jesus did, maybe we need to spend some time hearing from each other, getting help from each other, and maybe getting inspired. Because seeing other people live like Jesus is such an incredible way to stay focused and stay ready and engaged so that we can live like Jesus too. We're getting through this book, we're getting there. We're on to chapter 3. I've absolutely loved reading through this. Even for myself, I've been learning so much. I've been reminded and inspired by Paul's writing. So please God, it can continue in the next 2 chapters. But in the meantime, as always, stay safe. And God bless, guys. Hopefully see you soon.